Hey, Benji.
Hi, Avi.
How's it going, man?
Baruch Hashem. How are you?
Oh, very good. I noticed you're a little bit more religious for this episode.
Slightly. Yes, that's because of our guest.
Be kissing up to your neighborhood rabbi.
I'm going to France, by the way.
I noticed that you have phylactery marks in your arm and that you're wearing fringes.
Yes.
But it's nighttime. When did you put on your phylacteries?
I'm trying to impress. Did I tell you I'm going to France?
Is that a phylactery tattoo? Because I think that's not allowed.
Nobody told me.
Anyway, you're going to France.
Yes.
Bonsoir. Bon voyage.
Yep.
You brushed up on your French?
Not yet. No.
Is everything okay with your flight?
Cram on the flight. I had to book and rebook because of the Houthis. I don't know if they're investing. Do they invest?
What do you mean? Are they making?
I was thinking that they could be like, it could be like some sort of insider trading here. They could like short Ben Gurion Airport, meaning if you have the missiles, and you're shooting them, you're ahead of the market,
right?
In all kinds of ways.
What's going to happen? You could short, I don't know, duty free.
Maybe that's behind it all. Right?
What's our assistant's name? Chris. Chris, find out what public companies are that operate at Ben Gurion Airport. Let's get on that. Let's get a piece of that.
Right.
Text the Houthis.
It's very hard booking flights now. That's the least of the issues, I guess. But
I guess slightly more serious is that there are missiles landing very close to the airport.
Also, right.
Today I was driving home from band practice. I'm in a band.
I heard about that.
I'm an amateur rock and roll drummer.
Emphasis.
All the other members are professionals. And on the way home from practice, which is in the industrial area of Ra'anana, which is not really industrial, let's face it. It's just a name that still sticks. But it's high tech. I'm talking to a friend on the phone, and it's on speakerphone, totally legal. And I'm looking straight ahead at the sky. There's like some traffic, and there's a missile, one of ours, an interceptor that's launched, and you see the smoke trail going up into the sky, much higher than the Iron Dome. So I'm assuming this is the Arrow.
Okay.
And I'm said to my friend, is there any warning that I didn't get? He's like, no. And then, sure enough, after about 10 seconds, a warning that a missile was launched from Yemen and there will likely be sirens in your area. And then after about 20 more seconds, sirens in the area. And I went into a garage.
What do you mean a garage?
Like I stopped the car on the side of the road, and there was a parking garage that I walked into. It was very convenient.
Okay.
And so that's life in Israel now. It's a little bit weird.
It's a little bit weird. Yeah. But we're not focusing tonight on security issues. Not
on security issues, not on the Houthis, not on Yemenites, not even on Yemenite Jews, actually. They're kind of out of the conversation tonight.
Right.
They're a very traditional community.
Very much so.
So Rabbi Seth Farber, our guest, who hails from Riverdale, where you and I both also made Aliyah from. One day someone should look into that, how Riverdale became a jumping off point to people making Aliyah.
Things were pretty grim there.
We should talk about that once.
On the mean streets of Riverdale.
And you once lost all your clothes, I remember, in a dry cleaner fire.
I did?
Yeah, you don't remember that. Yeah, you did. At least you said you did. And that you made I think you made a killing on it from the insurance payment.
I have no memory of that.
Suspicious source of the fire.
No memory. No. That happened?
There are pictures of a bald guy with a lighter.
I really don't remember.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't remember a lot of my misdeeds.
We don't remember the pain.
But we have an incredible guest.
We do.
I go to his shul, or a synagogue for our American listeners, and
or church.
He is the most wonderful
church because he's he's not into separation of church and state, as we'll find out in the podcast.
We'll talk about that. But, he is changing the world, and he's such an incredible person, such an impressive human being.
Also, very nice person.
Very nice person.
And his whole family is very nice. His wife is very nice. We actually recorded the podcast in their home, which is also very hospitable of them. And yeah, he's a pillar of the community. Pillar in a good sense, not in in the Sodom and Gomorrah sense where she gets turned into a pillar. He's a pillar in a good
he's
sense.
Not made of salt.
No. Yeah. He's salty, though.
He is doing God's work, I think, and we're going to get into it with him. And you're going to hear all about his incredible organization, ITIM,
I came out of this
all about the established religion here in Israel, the religious establishment, rather.
And it's complicated. Both it's sometimes the fault of people, and sometimes no fault of anyone. It's an incredibly complicated system and series of topics and issues. And thank God that there are good people who are trying to change it for the better.
Great people.
I knew some of what Rabbi Farber does over the years, but I really learned a lot talking to him in this episode, and it's worth listening all the way to the end. It's one of our longer episodes.
It's worth it.
But it's worth it. We barely talk, so that's the good news.
You're in luck. I learned a ton, and I feel like we could do like 10 more with him.
Yeah.
And he is accomplishing so much every day that it's just unbelievable.
Right. So thank you, Rabbi Farber.
Thank you, Rabbi Farber.
Enjoy the episode.
Okay, let's do it.
Hello, Benji.
Avi.
How's it going?
Baruch Hashem, yom yom.
Oh, wow, you're on your best behavior.
I am.
Ask me how I'm doing.
It doesn't matter because my rabbi is here. Rabbi Seth Farber. Hello.
Hey.
Hello, Rabbi Seth Farber. What should we call you? Can we call you Seth? Should we call you Rabbi?
I think we'll just go with Seth for tonight.
Okay.
Thank you. For tonight, I noticed you had.
He's my rabbi. I'm a congregant of Netivot. What do we call it? What's Beit Knesset? What do we call it?
Kehila.
I screwed that up. I don't go now. Okay. Yeah. And I could not be more excited.
Well, thank you for having me. It's after hearing you guys for a while, it's nice to be here myself.
Okay. It was tough to get you. You're a busy man.
I'm sorry about that.
He's on all the other podcasts.
No, I thought rabbis do almost nothing, but I guess they have things to do. Seth. Tell us about your history. Where do you come from?
Okay, so I was born in New York City. Mm-hmm. Grew up in a religious Zionist household. Both my parents are European, actually. They were both born in Europe and before the Holocaust. My dad is 96, alive, lives just a block away from me here. And he ran from the Nazis.
He looks like he's 70.
Right. He's pretty good, and he's still looking for a tennis partner. So if anybody listening wants to play tennis with him here in Ranana.
God willing, we're going to have him on the podcast anyway for another reason.
You might be able to beat him.
I'm terrible at tennis.
I know. That's why I'm suggesting it.
So, so he ran from the Nazis on the 12th of May, 1940. And he basically ran south to Switzerland, then to France, and then eventually to Portugal, and then to Cuba, and then to the States. This is relevant to the story later on about what it is that I do, but he was very involved as a Zionist when he was a kid and growing up, etc. My mom actually was born in what was then called Pressburg. Now it's called Bratislava.
Yeah, sure, Bratislava.
Right. So she was born, my grandfather, who taught me for my bar mitzvah, was Moshe Frankel. And he was the great-grandson of the main...
Minchat Chinuch?
No, the Chasam Sofer. The main
okay.
You get that into almost every conversation. It's like, you have Yichus. Okay, I got it.
So here's the thing. It actually was super important for us growing up. Like, it came up every Friday night. It's because you have to understand, my grandfather was he was kicked out of the yeshiva at 18 because they brought some, funder, and my grandfather was caught walking around the campus of the Pressburg Yeshiva with a girl. So,
wow.
And my mother was born, like a block away from the yeshiva. And were it not for the Holocaust, that's where we would be.
Right, in Bratislava.
Not just in Bratislava. In other words, we would be part of the Chasam Sofer generation, whatever thing, I don't know how to say it. So it's not the Yichus that's so interesting, but just like the twist of history that you end up, you could have been in one way and then you end up in a totally different place.
Where was the yeshiva there? Do you know where it was?
In Pressburg. You can still go to the Kever.
The Kever, I know you can go to.
So the yeshiva was right above the hill, right next to the Kever, really right next to the Kever. And
so they knew each other then?
So my parents?
Yeah.
No. They met only in the States. They actually met at Grossinger's.
Okay.
Wow.
So, my parents met at Grossinger's.
Right. So probably a lot of people listening.
I guess so.
My dad ended up actually in Berkeley for a number of years working. He tried out school, but he never went to college. He went for a semester. But the story that's relevant to our discussion tonight is that he spent a lot of time when he finally got to the States, when he was age 18 or 19. So he ended up connecting with just about anybody. So he likes to pride himself as saying that he was the only person who was a member also of HaShomer HaTzair and also HaShomer HaDati. Like that didn't make a difference to him. Just he was happy to have Zionist friends. And he ended up doing some work for Beitar that ended up involving himself with the Haganah as well when he was in California at a very young age. And I think he spent a lot of time thinking about
what type of work?
Israel.
I mean, we can interview him too.
Right. But
okay.
The story in the family, which again, the details of which are a little sketchy, I would say.
Okay.
But the story in the family is that Dad had a car at age 19 in Berkeley, and someone from Beitar came over to him and said, "Hey, we could really use your help." And he said, "Okay, what can I do?" And they said, "Listen, go down to the port, leave your car there, leave the trunk open, and come back in 15 minutes, and there'll be an address on your seat. Take the drive there, leave the car with the trunk open, and then you can take your car again. And here's an emergency number if you want." So my dad did this a few times. He drove his car and whatever, but as 19-year-olds want to do, he ended up, again, this is the story. Right. I don't have all the details, but he got pulled over by a policeman for speeding. And the policeman said, "Hey, son, what's in your trunk?" And he said, "I don't know."
I thought he got pulled over because his trunk was open.
No, he got pulled over because he was speeding, and they said, "What's in your trunk?" He said, "I don't know." And he said, "Can you please open your trunk?"
Sounds like an inside job.
And then the guy came over and said, "What do you do with airplane parts in your trunk?" And then my dad said,
"Where should I put him? In the driver's seat?"
I don't really know. Here's the phone number, and it was the governor of California who said, "Just let the kid go." And I actually confirmed some of the details of the story with a historian who
Arnold Schwarzenegger?
No.
It's right again. What is wrong with
the head of the Jewish Agency now wrote his doctorate on exactly American young people helping the Haganah, especially with arms shipments and stuff like that. The follow-up to this story is that I have a family member, I guess I can't say who's a fighter pilot, and the listeners probably know that when the fighter pilots finish their course, so they're allowed to invite some very important personality in their lives to come meet the head of the Air Force. So they can imagine like a big, boardroom table with the head of the Air Force and like 20 people around the room. And my relative, who's a fighter who finished the course, so he didn't really have any influential people in his life, influential educators, so he asked me to come. So we're sitting around this room, so I figured, so everybody talks about, what their influence on the cadet, and when I come, so I figured it's my opportunity to tell my father's story about how our connection to the Air Force began in 1947. So at the end of the circle of all the people, the head of the Air Force, he says, "I really appreciate all of you telling you wonderful educators, telling me how you inspire these kids, but I really want to go back to Farber." He says, "I just have one thing to tell you. We still need American airplane parts." So, yes, I'm sure, Amikam Norkin still remembers this story as well. Right. Anyway, the reason I tell this story is because I think I grew up feeling like the main parts of Jewish history I had missed. In other words, my dad had been involved in this, like the Zionist stuff, and my mom had been involved in like this, at least come from like this great moment in Jewish history that no longer existed. Right. And we grew up in like the Zionist home that like there was a lot of stuff going on. Maybe the most important thing that happened to me is, kind of like that set me in motion was the Soviet Jewry movement, But really I felt like the main things in Jewish history in our era had happened. Right, 1948, 1967, which is the year I was born. And I was born before the war, but, when I was like 6 months old. So, and in 1976, I remember, Entebbe, but the main things that happened. And then I spent a lot of time in my youth back and forth here. My dad had some work here and stuff like that. But when it was pretty obvious that I was going to end up here at some point, and I had a little...
His dad had some work here. He was selling cocaine out of cut open aircraft parts or snuff.
Right. I don't think it was any of that kind of stuff, but I spent a few years after college. I went to New York University for college, and then I went to Smicha Yeshiva University. I spent a lot of time back and forth here. Sorry?
Better than the opposite. Better than Smicha.
So, and then I spent 5 years in Boston teaching in Maimonides, and Benji actually took my job at one point.
Yep.
Right. So that's important to know that I'm looking at the guy. They fired me because of him. So, no, that's not true.
No, they hand your book out to like visitors. You wrote a book.
All right, I did write a book. Right when I first came to Israel after my stint in Boston.
Do your research,
I know. I keep calling it the book because I barely remember. It's about the Rav in Boston. Yes. Yeah.
Right. So I did when I came back to Israel. So like I said, it was pretty kind of obvious that I was going to come back to Israel at some point. Mm-hmm. But after 5 years in Boston, I was ready to come here, etc. So I came here almost 30 years ago, and I went back to school. I have a doctorate from Hebrew University. I did write about my
what's a doctorate in?
In modern Jewish history. And I wrote a book that was subsequently published about Rabbi Soloveitchik's career as a community rabbi in Boston. Most people know him as an intellectual.
Again, that's the right order, to write it and then for it to be published. Benji, you should learn from your rabbi.
Yeah.
Just doing stuff.
I wasn't aware there's another way, but ChatGPT certainly has that option clearly.
I think ChatGPT, yeah.
So, but that
was your thesis?
That was my thesis.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my thesis.
That's cheating. Okay, yeah.
Okay, but when I got here, I began to realize, it took me 5 years to realize, but I began to realize that there's something else going on in Israel that is no less dramatic 75 years or whatever, then 65 years after, or 55 years after the founding of the state, that's no less dramatic in terms of this, great moment or this great era in Jewish history, because, or maybe specifically because the security issues in Israel are so not joined, whereas there's so much challenge to security. We actually haven't been able to come together and figure out what this means for the Jewish people. What does it mean that we have a sovereign state? What does it mean that we have autonomy? What does it mean that Judaism has gone through some, seismic change that we don't know what to make of it? And does it mean? And I think there are basically three schools of thought, and I'm a member of the third school.
Okay.
Right. One school of thought basically says, you could call it Ben Gurion if you want, but it's like it's that Judaism was progressing very nicely, and then there was the destruction of one temple, there was the destruction of another temple, then we got thrown out of Israel for 2,000 years, but now that we're back, we're starting again. Like we just pick up where we left off 2,000 years ago, and there was a little blip for 2,000 years where we didn't have autonomy. But that was a blip, and who cares what really happened then and what developed then? And then there's another school of thought, which you could call the Haredim, I guess, which says nothing happened. Nothing happened in 1948 or 1967. Nothing's happened. In other words, we're just continuing that same trajectory. Again, the trajectory towards whatever you want to call it, but the trajectory, it might be, for it was basically, if the first school of thought says, we just have to live for the future now, and the second school of thought says we just have to live for the past, right? We're just a continuum of the past. And then there's a third school of thought, which I think I've come to realize is really where I stand, which is that we're not stuck in the past. We recognize that something dramatic has happened, and we don't know what it means, or we don't fully know what it means. And at the same time, we understand that we can't just ignore the developments, what I consider to be the positive developments, although there have been some negative ones also, that happened in 2,000 years of not being autonomous and 1,800 years of not being in Israel, or 1,500 years, or whatever number you give. But we have to build a future with an eye towards the future, but not ignore what happened in the past. We have to, and we have to build on the past, and that's what's driven me. That's what driven me to do what I do professionally.
Well, just tie that back. Meaning, when you said that you always felt like history, you didn't have your shot at history, or all the big events had happened already. So that led you to move here and get involved in what you do. So
I think it led me to move. My sister-in-law once said that the great thing about living in Israel is that when you wake up in the morning, you've already done something.
Right.
And that's a very profound line. And I think when I moved here, I felt like that was going to be my contribution. And I guess I made a decision at a certain point that was more important. Just getting up in the morning and being in Israel was more important than doing whatever career trajectory I had in the States. When I got here, or over the course of the first 5 years when I got here, I realized that there's really something that can be done here that's much more significant, because we need to design the future of Jewish life. And what's happened until now is there hasn't really been a lot of thought that's gone into it. And because of that, there's a lot of disaffection, and there's a lot of disenfranchisement, and there's a lot of alienation from the very thing that brought us here in the first place, which is not only some Zionist dream, but also some Jewish Zionist dream. Some sense that, like, Judaism has something to say to the world, and it actually has something to say to the world from autonomous nation that, that we control our destiny.
Okay. So what you're talking about is your work, your life work at this point, right? Which you do through the organization ITIM. I'm on their mailing. When did you found it?
So I arrived here in 1995. It's not that I kind of came totally alone. I have a good group of friends that basically more or less made Aliyah with me at more or less the same time. We have a very unique situation besides the friends I've made along the way, like you guys. There's 6 or 7 of us that all went to elementary school together. We've done everything together our whole lives. We all live within about 500 yards of each other.
Yeah, you should know that in shul, it's like people look at you guys like the in crowd.
I don't know.
You go to the Kiddush club together.
No,
it's
okay,
whatever.
very nice.
We'll talk about that later.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
But there's something special about having kind of like a backbone of people you've grown up with who are supportive of each other, etc. Like I said, I went back to school, and in 2002, I founded an organization based on basically some research that had been done independent of me, and some funding that some other people helped me get at the beginning, that basically set out to solve a very simple problem. The problem actually I can articulate statistically wise, and it actually is an indictment of me, because the numbers haven't changed all that much despite the fact that I've been doing this for 25 years, or almost 25 years.
Okay. Is that your donor pitch? Or
No.
That's just
this
a
is
fact.
just
Okay,
a fact.
Yeah.
That, in other words, my donor pitch is quite the opposite. Like,
I know.
I'm a total failure.
I know.
Right? Because again, statistically speaking, somewhere between 68 and 78% of Jewish Israelis say it's important or very important for them to be married with a rabbi officiating. Mm-hmm. And yet, I'll just give one statistic, which is in the latest study of the Israel Democracy Institute, 78% of Jewish Israelis say they have no confidence at all in the religious establishment. They have more confidence in members of Knesset than they do in the religious establishment. They trust the police more than the religious establishment. They trust the courts more than the religious establishment. It's consistently the number one, and for 10 years it's already been that way.
Yeah.
The number one least trusted organization in Israel. Now, if somewhere between 12 and 18% of the Israeli Jewish population is religious, so you understand that means within the non-Orthodox population, the number basically hovers around 0%.
I'm not sure that there's more trust in the Orthodox.
But the Orthodox also have a very serious distrust of the religious establishment. Okay. And this is just a good example of the fact that no one paid attention. In other words, the issue of Judaism, and I want to talk about what the religious establishment is, but basically we just let it go. No one ever paid attention to this. No one understood that the role of the religious establishment was to a certain extent, not to a full extent, but to a certain extent, writing the script, designing what Jewish life would look like here. Mm-hmm. So over the course of time, that manifested itself in hundreds of thousands of people getting crazy subsidies to just sit and learn Torah. But it also manifested itself in
Benji.
The way people have to get married, the way people get buried, the way people get divorced, the way people get converted, right? All those things, all of a sudden became kind of a monopoly of a very, very certain type of Judaism, where unlike what we had developed for 2,000 years, which was, and again, if you would just pretend.
And those same hypocrites that have the monopoly won't let you play Monopoly on Shabbos. Am I right, Benji?
Is that a thing?
I think that's a thing. There's a rabbi here we could ask him.
Can you play Monopoly on Shabbos?
I'm going to take the fifth on that.
See what I'm talking
Depends
about?
which version of Monopoly. No, I think you can play Monopoly on Shabbos.
I never played it. It's too long.
Yes. But the point is that there's religious coercion in Israel. There's no separation of church and state. And it's just important to make it clear for the listeners. That means if you're... I love to say it like this. Do you know what the intermarriage rate in Israel is? Do you ever think about the intermarriage rate? The intermarriage rate in the States is something like a little over 70%.
Right.
Do you know what the intermarriage rate in Israel is?
No.
0.
Because
there is no intermarriage in Israel. Because legally it is not possible to get married outside of your religion. We inherited, and no one paid attention to this, we inherited the Turkish model of how to get married. You can only get married through your religious culture, through your religious denomination. So if you're Jewish, you cannot marry a Muslim or a Christian unless you convert out. You can't. Mm-hmm. So you want to do that? Go overseas.
Right.
Otherwise, but in Israel, you can't do that. Now, that might be okay, but if the way to get married Jewish and the way we determine someone's Jewish is by a certain small subset of people, let's call that for argument's sake for tonight, the rabbinate or the rabbinical courts, it's a little more legally, that's more accurate. So if the rabbinical courts, the rabbinate can determine who was a Jew and how they can decide, and basically there's no checks and balances. They can decide that anybody with the last name Hain is not Jewish, and it would be very, very hard to stop them.
The plot
from that.
thickens.
Right, exactly.
Just one quick question: what do rabbits have to do with it?
What?
He's talking about the rabbinate.
Don't do that. We have a serious
I've
guest.
been holding that in.
Don't worry. Soon we'll get the free Soviet jewelry, and you'll ask me where you can get your free Soviet jewelry.
Well, that I know.
Okay. So.
Well, let's take a step back for Avi and other listeners. How did this develop in Israel? Meaning, at the founding of the state and forward, like how did the rabbinate gain its power, and what does it have power over?
Okay, so the Israeli chief rabbinate actually exists pre-state. From 1935, already Rabbi Kook was the chief rabbi of Israel, and
of Palestine,
more accurately. And again, you could only get married through your religious denomination, so you had to go through the rabbinate. Then the state basically just inherited that when it came to marriage. When the state was founded, so there was a law passed about marriage and divorce.
Okay.
It basically gave the rabbinate, which was then a very, very small entity. The people who choose the rabbinate is a small group. It's a group of 150 people that's made up of religious figures and some of the mayors and a whole different group of people. And I'll just jump 5 steps ahead and talk about, we've been involved in a lot of litigation recently in the last year or two about who appoints the chief rabbis. And that's, for example, how many women are on that group of 150. We've been involved in litigation against the state of Israel to kind of change the MO about how these people are elected. That coming back to, so there's a group that was given that power. When it comes to funerals, so it's actually quite interesting. There was no modus operandi about how do you do funerals. So there were religious councils that were developed in every city, and they in principle were in charge of burial. But there were also a number of NGOs that existed pre-state, and they just continued going. So some of them are still involved
selling graves,
selling graves and burying people, and then ultimately they became, when the National Insurance Institute was created, Bituach Leumi, that pays for graves. For people who are listening from overseas, know that there's one reason to make aliyah is that funerals in Israel are free because the national insurance pays for it. So they basically started paying these groups that were licensed and giving out licenses. So the people who were doing it just kept on doing it. Whereas there was never a sense of, let's design the way we want this to look so that it can be user-friendly, so it can be accessible, so the Jews can live Jewish lives in the way they want to live Jewish lives. And we'll talk about that.
But at this point, it's enshrined in law?
So at this point, almost everything is enshrined in law.
So what is it?
So the rabbinate has control over marriage, divorce. The issue of conversion is actually, it's a different law that says the head of your religious community is in charge of conversion, but Supreme Court has determined, for now at least, that the head of the Jewish religious community is the chief rabbi. So by default, even though there's no law that says it, the chief rabbi runs conversion.
That makes sense.
We'll talk about whether it makes sense or not in a few minutes.
It makes sense to say that that's the head of the Jewish.
Maybe.
Give them that much.
Okay. No, it makes sense in one sense. It doesn't make sense in terms of historically, because in the 1980s and the 1990s and the early 2000s, the chief rabbi had nothing to do with conversion. In other words, the way things were operating was completely different.
Who was in charge
than it is
of it
now?
then?
Local rabbis, municipal rabbis.
Okay.
Were in charge, and they signed conversion documents, and those were accepted by the state. And then the chief rabbi kind of did a power grab and said, hey, I'm this person. And then they went to court, and they said, okay, from now on, that's what it'll be. But there was no reason it had to be like that. So marriage, divorce, conversion, the issue of proving Jewishness actually there's at least 2 different definitions of what it means to be a Jew in Israel, who is a Jew.
Right.
And we'll talk about this in a few minutes also, because you can be who is a Jew for the purposes of immigration. And that can be, there's the law of return, right? Very controversial, but right, still on the Knesset table, because now we're already in the 3rd and 4th generation. But the law of return says anybody with one Jewish grandparent, as long as they didn't convert, out of Judaism, can make aliyah. And we have a different definition, which is the rabbinate's definition. Since they can control marriage, they'll say, hey, we'll decide who is a Jew. So it's not just if your mother's Jewish, but if your mother's Jewish enough for us to believe that she's Jewish.
Right.
So that might mean a lot of conservative or reform Jews who don't have Orthodox credentials might be out of the system, right? Just to articulate it, and then I'll give some examples. But let's say, there's been almost, I think the number is now 850,000 people who have come on birthright, right, as descendants of Jews. And my guess, and it's a pretty educated guess, is that between 80 and 85% of them would not be able to get married in Israel. Not either because they aren't halachically Jewish, or mostly because they can't prove it to the satisfaction of the rabbinate. Okay, so we can talk about why that is and how that happens. But imagine one arm of the Jewish state spending billions of dollars to bring these kids to Israel, get them excited about Israel and their Judaism, and then the other arm of the state of Israel saying, you're not welcome here. But we don't have to talk about those 850,000 because there's another million of people, of immigrants who've come on Aliyah, mostly from the former Soviet Union, but also more and more from France and from Argentina, and more from the States. People who have made Aliyah under the law of return, who we encourage to come on Aliyah, right? We paid for them. We give them what's called the Sal Klita, right? The basket of benefits when they come here. They basically, right? We tell them they have to pay taxes. We tell them they have to serve in the army. And then when they come to get married, we tell them, oh, there's this very small group of rabbis that sit in Jerusalem on Rehov Yirmiyahu, and they decide who is Jewish and who isn't. And as far as we're concerned, unless you can prove it to our satisfaction, then sorry, there's no way for you to get married in Israel.
Okay, but this may take you a little bit far afield, but meaning a conservative Jew in America who had nobody convert all the way back through the line to Europe, should be fine.
As long as they can prove it.
Right.
But how do you prove it? What's the satisfaction, or what's the threshold for the rabbinate? That is something that we use. So here, I'll take a step back for a second. So identifying there was a problem here, there's a lot of pain, whereas usually when NGOs start, it's because they're trying to resolve not just a problem, but there's people feel pain. And in this issue, again, there's more painful things in this country in the sense that there's a security issue. Right. But in terms of existentially, this is the question of what is the Jewish story, what is the Jewish narrative, what is the Jewish destiny here in Israel, right? That's a question. It's very painful right now because no one knows what the answer is. No one's had a chance to write the script. And worse than the fact that the script is unwritten is that the people who are taking hold of it are primarily people who don't have a sense, this is the big pain in my mind, of Jewish peoplehood, of Jewish destiny. They don't have a good sense of what this all really means.
So, is that because they're coming more and more from the Haredi camp, or but they weren't always there? Meaning this pre-existed them taking over.
They're part of the story, but they shouldn't control the story. So,
no, but I'm saying the rabbinate was not always Haredi.
It wasn't always Haredi,
and
correct.
Yet then they made these mistakes.
In the last 30 years, it's become much worse.
Right.
Much, much worse. For political reasons. I've said multiple times in the Knesset as well. I've had people scream at me and walk out on me in the Knesset, etc., especially people from Shas and Agudat Yisrael. But I consistently say the rabbinate is a political entity, not a religious entity. And the moment I say that, that always causes, a lot of anger. So let me take a step back and just talk about what I do.
Okay.
Because people don't understand exactly what it is that ITIM does sometimes. ITIM was founded to basically make, our original mission statement was to empower people in Jewish life. But over the course of time, we've pivoted a couple of times. And now our vision statement is to make Israel.
To sell cybersecurity software.
Right. No, we
Rabbi
take the
Farber's
people...
pivoted, Benji.
We take the people...
I noticed before that you said you were on the mailing list, not the donor list, but maybe now you want to invest in cybersecurity.
Let's hear the pitch. Yeah.
Our donors are the people who are selling cybersecurity things. But, right. Our vision statement is to make Israel, in other words, it's not about the individual anymore. It starts with the individual, of course, but it's to make Israel a place that's respectful and responsive to the Jewish needs of the Jewish people. So we're basically trying to rewrite the Jewish story of Israel, or to start writing it. Right. It's not even to rewrite, it's to start writing it.
Okay.
So what do? The first thing is we help people. We've helped more than 100,000 families who've called an assistance center. We have 8 people, professionals, who work in our office, who basically are in touch with every tentacle of the religious establishment in Israel. And people just call every single day, 20 to 30 families call every single day and say, I want to live a Jewish life and I'm stuck. I can't get married, I can't get buried, I can't get converted, I want to live a Jewish life in the state of Israel. And someone's telling me, no.
Right.
How could that possibly be?
Does that mean octopus is kosher because of the tentacles?
So I want to think that octopuses are not the only animals that are octopi, not the only animals that have tentacles. But if they do, okay.
What other animals have tentacles? Just a little bit of who has tentacles?
The Rothschilds. Okay, so
one thing is an assistance center. From there, we're able to isolate or crystallize systemic issues.
Because you see what people are complaining about.
Right, exactly. We have our ear to the ground and we can hear what people... And when we identify systemic issues, then we have 2 departments that try to change that. One is a legal department. So we have 5 full-time lawyers who work in a legal department. And I'll give some examples in a second, but they basically can litigate, and they can use all sorts of legal tools from Freedom of Information Act to all sorts of other things to basically identify where problems exist.
Okay.
And then we have a public policy department, which also has a couple of lawyers and a couple of research people, and they write reports, and they use all sorts of parliamentary tools to be able to, right? We don't lobby, but we do a lot of talking with decision makers about how things can change. When we identify a systemic problem, we can resolve it.
And in the first department, they're in the religious courts, some, or they're all, meaning are they ever going to the Beis Din, or they're
yeah, some of them go to the Beit Din, and some of them go to the Supreme Court, and they can go to local courts.
Okay.
I'll give you a couple of examples.
Yeah.
By the way, I'll just tell you that the chief rabbi, there's new chief rabbis in Israel. So the chief rabbi, I've already met him 4 or 5 times. So the first time I was in his office, which was a couple of weeks after he was elected. So he said to me, I haven't had a chance to read all the cases that you filed against me. So I said, I have a reputation of being, going to litigation, but I want you to understand, and I say this at every opportunity that I can, that I don't love going to litigation. Litigation is binary. I win, you lose, you win, I lose. And it's very expensive. And I don't think that's the way to resolve problems in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a tool in our arsenal.
Right.
But it's not the ultimate tool. It's not the tool I want to use. And the lawyers know that also. It's the last resort. It's only when we don't have good choices to in any other way. So I'll give you an example.
That's another callback, because Grossinger's is also the last resort.
I don't think that was the last one.
I think so. It's closed. The Concord might have been.
Brown.
Kutcher's?
Browns, I think it was.
Kutcher's is still around, Kutcher's?
I think they
I take it back.
Yeah.
I take it back.
No, you weren't right. Okay.
So,
some examples.
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you an example. I mentioned before that there's hundreds of thousands or almost 1 million immigrants from the former Soviet Union. And again, I find that in Israel, who made Aliyah. So I'm particularly sensitive to this because, like I said before, when I grew up, the Soviet Jewry movement was a big thing for me.
Even in our day. There's people as young as Benji can remember that.
Yep.
Okay, I hope there's not that much difference between us, but there is.
I think 5 years.
So I'm not going to comment on that either. So I'll leave that with the monopoly.
No, you're
question.
67, right? Born in 67?
Oh, yes.
72.
Okay. 72.
Yeah.
Did he just call me 67?
No, born in. Born in 67.
Born in 67. Yeah.
So imagine Maxim and Alina Sardakov. Okay, they're a good example of someone. Okay, Maxim and Alina made Aliyah in 1993 or 1992. You're responsible for them. Meaning you were out there screaming, 1, 2, 3, 4, open up the iron door, right? And free Soviet jewelry and all that kind of stuff, right? And Emily Littell.
Yeah.
Okay, that's who it was. Right? Do you know what I'm talking about, Ben?
No, but the name is familiar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Emily Littell was a Saturday Night Live figure who did a whole thing.
Why do you say yeah?
The name is familiar. That's all I'm
saying.
He says a name and you want to seem smart, so you say yeah, and you hope he'll go on. And then he points to me, he says, because I'm looking at him quizzically, and I don't know. And I'm honest with him and honest with myself.
Okay. I'm also honest.
Who is Emily Littell?
Emily Littell is a character on Saturday Night Live, and she's the ultimate indicator of how the Soviet Jewry movement permeated the American psyche.
Okay.
Because it's one thing to have in 1979, the Jackson-Vanik amendment that said that America couldn't negotiate agreements with Russia without bringing up the Soviet Jews. But it was a whole other thing when Saturday Night Live did a whole skit about what's all this I hear about free Soviet jewelry? Where do I get my free Soviet jewelry? And she does this whole thing, and she's the one who created the famous phrase when I think Dan Aykroyd would say to her, Emily, that's not Soviet jewelry, it's Soviet jewelry. And then she would just say, never mind.
Yeah, right.
That was her. That was Emily Littell. Okay, and you can all look it up on YouTube, and you can watch the free Soviet jewelry thing.
It's weird. I've gone down so many rabbit holes of like SNL on YouTube, and it didn't know that I wanted that. Like, I'm Jewish. I was at that rally in Washington, and I never got any of this stuff.
So that this predates the rally.
Now you'll go down rabbinate holes.
Yes.
Okay, so you will watch it. So the American Jewish community, and by the way, there's a book called "When They Come for Us, We'll Be Gone," which was written by the I don't remember which reporter he was for the forward. His name just eludes me right now. I'll remember in a couple minutes.
Probably Goldberg.
So no, it wasn't. Anyway, in his book, he argues. He says the Soviet Jewry movement was a great example of Israel invested all these resources, etc. And in the end, it was a bunch of American, what Sharansky used to call students and housewives that beat the so brought down the
book's called "When They Come for Us, We'll Be Gone."
We'll Be Gone. Which
Now
is the
I understand the Safam song.
right? That's it. He took it from the Safam song. Okay, all that.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay,
Thank you. Finally,
okay.
no, finally you admit it.
Okay.
There's a group called Safam. They had a
Which
song
means
called "We Are
mustache.
Leaving Mother Russia."
Oh,
They
I know
also
that.
had what were the other? Let 'em out. Let 'em out.
Did
Let 'em
they
out
also sing the
tonight.
one about the defector and the MiG?
No.
Somewhere over Tel Aviv, there's a blip on a radar screen.
That sounds like them.
Prime Minister's awake and the Russian MiG has been...
It must be
It has
them.
to be them.
Maybe we'll make that...
But what? Just what's
So-
just 1 second, because I'm not going to get this out of my head. I want to have another question. But the one where they talk about like the people in a bomb shelter in Kiryat Shmona, na 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 na, and there's people na na na. Na na na. How does that go?
That he said was the Torah.
He showed. Falasha
about-
was their name.
correct.
Just another foreigner in another foreign land. That's a fun, right?
You see how amazing Israel? We brought 1,100,000 immigrants from the former Soviet Union. We've brought 800,000 people from the United States. We've brought 100 and 200,000 from Ethiopia. There's something dramatic going on here.
Yes.
And we've screwed up the story completely
Yeah.
in so many ways. One of the ways is the way we dealt with the immigrants of the former Soviet Union, like Maxim and Alina. So Maxim and Alina made Aliyah, second grade together in Ashkelon, BS number 3 in Ashkelon, public school number 3. By 16, they're a couple. They go to the army together. And when they get to the army, someone says to them, hey, you guys know if you ever want to get married, you can have a prom. And they say, what the hell are you talking about? And Maxim says, my mother's Jewish. And Alina says, my father's Jewish. Why would we have a problem?
Mm.
Exactly that.
Mm.
And then, thanks to the foresight of, again, a whole set of people from, Prime Minister Sharon. And
I thought Jews
Elazar
weren't supposed to
Stern.
have foresight.
Right.
Oh, no, sorry.
So in the year 2000, the government realized there were hundreds of thousands of people who had emigrated to Israel who weren't halachically Jewish. Today, by the way, we're talking about 6% of the Jewish population of Israel is not halachically Jewish.
Of the Jewish population.
Of the Jewish population. So if you're talking about around 8 million Jews in Israel right now, right? We just crossed 10 million this past Yom Ha'atzmaut, citizens,
Mazel tov.
right? You have about 8 million Jews, and the number of the Central Bureau of Statistics is 581,000 that are registered as no religion. They made Aliyah as Jews under the law of return because they have a Jewish grandparent, but they have a Jewish grandparent that's not. Right? So Alina is one of them.
Okay.
Okay. So Alina joins the army. The army has a conversion program. It's amazing, right?
Nativ.
It's incredible. It's called Nativ. It's one of the Nativs. There's a number of Nativs in this country, right? So this is one of the Nativs, right? The army conversion program. And Alina says, sure, I'm happy to join the conversion program. I'm going to marry Maxim. It's all awesome. She joins the Nativ program. She adopts a traditional lifestyle. She converts to the Nativ program. She has a conversion certificate signed by the Chief Rabbi of Israel. Awesome. Okay, things happen, like wars, like the Second Lebanon War breaks out, right? At Maxim's wedding, which I performed, right? At Maxim's wedding, all the major news stations were there. You'll hear why in a minute. So they went over to interview him right before the chuppah. They come to interview him, and he says, I was in field intelligence. When they dropped me on the other side of the Litani River, he said, then no one questioned my girlfriend's conversion. Then it was just fine. But in 2012, I don't remember the exact date already, they walked into Ashkelon to Rabbi Bloy, which is an irony in of itself, because if you know the Bloy names, you might remember.
Do not know the Bloy name.
Okay, so
know
you'll remember
the
this
Bloy name?
story.
I don't know.
Rabbi Bloy's uncle was a famous Neturei Karta rabbi who ended up marrying a Swiss stewardess who converted in a day. No, you never heard that story?
I heard that story.
Well, the
Yes.
Swiss
If
are
you
very
haven't heard the
punctual.
story,
Yeah.
go look it up again.
Okay.
Look up Bloy, and it was a big scandal. Neturei Karta marrying
I
Swiss
remember
stewardess.
it. I remember it.
Anyway, bottom line is the nephew is sitting there as the chief rabbi in charge. He's the marriage registrar in charge of marriage in this country.
Have you ever
And he
flown Swiss Air? It's its own punishment, I think, to marry a Swiss stewardess.
Okay. Well, okay. It's another punishment to have anything to do with the Bloy family.
Right.
So Maxim and Alina walk in after the war and after all. It's all great. Are you Jewish, Maxim? He says, sure. Here's my mother's birth certificate. Here's my certifications, whatever. Alina, you Jewish? He says, actually, my father's Jewish, but I went through a conversion. Here's the conversion certificate signed by the chief rabbi of Israel. To which Rabbi Bloy says, I don't accept that.
He's a rabbi in Ashdod.
Ashkelon. He's the rabbi in Ashkelon. He's appointed by the chief rabbi of Israel.
So
He's a
explain
municipal
that.
rabbi.
How could that have happened?
How does he
Right.
have jurisdiction?
So he's the representative of the chief rabbi. He's the marriage registrar. He says, I don't accept it. So she says, what do you want me to do? He says, go to the rabbinical court, a different arm of the rabbinate. She goes to the rabbinical court. They certify her conversion. He comes back and says, I don't accept their authority either. Now, I want you to understand again, without going to all the details, but I want you to understand this was going on in a period of a year. Our assistance center got 40 calls, 40 different people who had converted.
I remember.
Who were going into 16, they went into 16 different rabbis in small places like Rishon LeZion or Petach Tikva or Malay Adumim, all major, hotbeds of immigrants in the former Soviet Union, all being told, again, not you can't prove you're Jewish, that the chief rabbi's conversion isn't good enough for us.
Right. Wow.
Which is crazy. Only Kafka could have made that up, right?
Yeah.
What Kafka couldn't have made up was the fact that 39 of them said, well, either we'll forget about it. Some of them walked away. Some of them said, when I went to the chief rabbi's office, I said, they're making fun of you, your own rabbis. They said, oh, we'll find a way around it. Instead of getting married in Ashkelon, so just open your file in Ra'anana, where they're a little more user-friendly, or go to Jerusalem, or something like that. But again, if you live in a place where nothing's changed, so that's the shtetl mentality. Oh, I'll find a way to do it this way. I'll find a way to do it that way. Right? That's what we would call Jew. But this is a sovereign country. You want people who have rights. They have Jewish rights. They should be able to go through the front door. So that's basically the first moment of the pivot, where we said, it's not enough to have a legal department. And we actually sued the chief rabbi of Israel to recognize his own conversions. Right? No, you can't say it another way. That's what we
I've
did.
often thought that, like going to kashrut, which I don't know if we're going to touch on, but that the people who give the hashgacha should be forced to eat only in places that they give the hashgacha to. Because I have a feeling that the people who give the hashgacha to the places I eat in would never eat in the places that they're giving hashgacha to.
So
a lot of the time. It's
a good question. I'll turn it into a question. The answer is some of them wouldn't and some of them would. There are some good people in the system, but the system as a whole it was never designed.
Right.
So it ends up lending itself to rot and to corruption and to, when there's lots of money and lots of budgets. I'll just give you a good example. The same conversion authority of the chief rabbi's office, right, today has a budget of 143 million shekel. That's their budget, 143 million shekel. And the guy who's running it, who I'm in a lawsuit against right now, who was appointed by the present government, not important who he is, really not important. His name is completely irrelevant.
Right.
When he took the job, since it was just a political thing, right?
Yeah.
When he took the job, he said, I don't want to give up my previous job. I enjoy working in this think tank. The guy's running a company
A Christian
of 143.
think tank.
No. He's writing halacha. He likes doing that. He said, so I'll take the job at 60%. So the guy who's in charge of 143 million shekel budget is only there 60% of the time. So it probably doesn't surprise you that the number of people they're converting last year, right? Again, I'm leaving out, there's different groups of converts, but let's assume the hardcore population, which is the Russians, right? They converted 743 Russians last year at 146 million shekel budget.
Wow.
Okay? That is staggeringly fail, right?
You
There's
should be
no
doing
way you
more.
don't get an F on that. But as a government, as a state,
How
no
many
one's
people
paying
want to
attention.
convert? How many people
That's
should they
an
be convert?
awesome question. It's an awesome question. The answer is no one really knows.
You hear that, Benji? Is an awesome
Okay.
question.
I knew it was
The
good
answer is
when you
no
said
one
it,
really
yeah.
knows because, again, we have studies that show that if conversion was done in a normal way, then, up to 50 or 60% of the immigrants would be interested in exploring it. But the way it is done now...
It's really no surprise that the guy married a Swiss model when the system is based... no, I messed it up. That the guy married a Swiss stewardess when the system is based on a Turkish model.
Right. Well, let me ask you a question, Rabbi.
So yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. Let's focus on...
I want to just get back to Maxime and Alina's story for a minute.
yeah. Sorry, go back to
Right.
it. Yeah.
So Maxime and Alina, he says, I'm a fighter. I'm willing to fight. So we sue the chief rabbinate, and it creates an enormous
You're
wave
suing
in
them like
this
for
country.
specific performance. Like you're suing them to
We're suing them to force their marriage registrars to open marriage files for converts of their
marriage.
of their own.
Yeah.
Right.
And eventually we win. So in every rabbinate now, there's there's someone who will open up a file for anybody who converts.
You won, but the rabbi took back the challah cover that you bought them for the wedding present.
So that's an example of how we work from the bottom up. And we've done the same thing. We've changed the way burial works in this country. We've changed the way mikvahs work in this country. We've changed. And along the way, we realized that we have to use one more tool. It's not enough to just use litigation, and it's not enough to use, trying to discuss things with policymakers and writing, legislation sometimes, which we've done, etc. In the issue of conversion, for example, now we're outright competing with the rabbinate. So 6 years ago, we opened the fourth department. with a partnership with a Rosh Yeshiva of blessed memory of Nachum Rabinovich called ITIM Gior Kalacha, where we went into direct competition with the rabbinate.
Which means ITIM, what does ITIM stand for? Anything?
ITIM means times your seasons. So in Hebrew it does stand for something. It doesn't make a difference, right?
What does it stand for?
Okay, but it means times your seasons. In other words, it's the moment of encounter, where your Jewish life encounters some foreign body that is basically telling you what you can and can't do.
So just to translate what you said, so you set up
an NGO.
An NGO that does that. No, but ITIM is an NGO, but the fourth arm that you set up is conversion.
The fourth thing we did is we set up a conversion system.
Okay.
We set up our own rabbinical court.
But it's accepted?
So that's an excellent question. So there are 3 concentric circles of recognition, if you will.
That means one inside another.
One is in the consensus. We started off with 6 rabbis willing to do conversions. We now have about 70.
You're saying 6 rabbis from the system?
From their religious Zionist rabbis, some of them...
Who are in the rabbinate.
So they're in the rabbinate. They're official members of the rabbinate. They're licensed like I am. I have a license to perform weddings. They're members of the rabbinate, so to speak. They weren't in the conversion authority. They weren't converting with a conversion authority.
Okay.
They are the chief rabbi appointed 29 or 30 rabbis. They're the only people who can convert in this country. And we decided to go exterritorial. We're just going to start converting people in the way we think it could be done.
But who's going to recognize it?
Who's going to recognize it? So at the beginning, nobody. Right? I remember Sharansky came at the beginning and he said, who the hell would want to convert with you?
Right.
So when we got to number 2,000, I invited him to the Beit Din to see the conversion. I'll talk about the numbers in a second. But so we began converting. We literally just began converting. We opened up kind of like a system. We opened up a class, began doing it. And so the first layer is once you get 70 rabbis from the religious Zionist community and some very, very prominent Rosh Yeshivas like Rabbi Rema Cohen in Otniel, or Rav Meidan in Har Etzion, or Rav Melamed in Har Bracha. So we've won that battle, so to speak. Whereas we have the consensus. The second 2 are legal battles.
Right.
The second thing is I mentioned before that the 581,000 that are here, the immigrants or their children, are all registered as no religion. That's a civil thing. So we sued the state of Israel and said, why are our conversions any less than the rabbinates? Look who's converting. Look who's performing the conversions. Look how we're doing it. Look what criterion we meet, etc.
Okay.
There was a big fight in the Supreme Court. It took a year and a half. And the Supreme Court ruled that our conversions are recognized.
Supreme Court, so they ruled like on the substance of your conversion or on the personalities involved, meaning?
No, on the substance of our conversions. There's a legal decision that anybody who converts in ITIM Gior Kalacha has to go through this legal procedure.
They made that determination.
Based on the criteria we have and the system we built, etc.
That's a crazy argument, meaning you're going to a secular court to judges some of whom know nothing about halacha, and you're showing them that like the actual like way that you convert people, that it is in accordance with halacha. Like that's what did it. It's not necessarily halachic. They didn't make a halachic decision. They said this meets the definition of what it means to be a Jew according to the law of return, let's say, for argument's sake, or what it takes to change your status in Israel. Okay, but that's a halachic determination. Or how did they determine that? How did they determine that your based in is okay?
Because a conversion, excellent question. The legal argument was that it has to be done within the context of a Jewish community and it has to meet certain criteria, have a certain time, etc. The way I like to say it tongue in cheek is that there's probably 6 or 7 people in the world who could determine who is a Jew in the state of Israel, and I'm one of them, according to the Supreme Court of Israel, which is absurd.
Why
and the
6 or 7 people? You're one, then anyone in the rabbinate.
No, the chief rabbi can do it.
2.
Okay. The head of the Orthodox movement in the States, who, for this purpose of the Misrat Apnim, is the chief rabbi of Israel. He's the head of the local Jewish community around the world. Okay. The head of the conservative movement, the head of the reform movement, because there's been 2 Supreme Court cases that have allowed them to do it. The head of the Jewish agency.
Not
sure
what does that
anybody
mean?
else.
One sec.
Not sure.
Then there's one guy. There's like a guy in the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
I think
no one knows. Yeah, he did pickles. He used to do pickles. Like Gus.
I think he has a hardware store now. But
that's a Norm
Macdonald
joke.
It's so Byzantine that it's hurting my head. I'm just trying to let me try to understand something. The rabbinate can convert people. So there are many rabbis or I don't know, batei din within the rabbinate that can perform conversion, right? So they're under the auspices of the chief rabbi, right? So all of them can.
But in the end, the chief rabbi has to sign the document.
He signs the document.
He's the one who is
he's not signing your
authorized.
document.
No.
You are.
Right.
Hey, bravo! That's a big win.
Right.
Yeah, but how does that help? In other words, now let's say you have...
Excellent question. So the third circle is, can you get married in Israel? Or divorced
where
in
can
Israel?
you get buried also?
Right. So burial you can, because I've changed your status, and the burial laws relate to what your status is in the interior ministry for the most part.
Okay.
But in terms of getting marriage, that's the third battle that we're still in the fighting. Meaning our people who convert with us still have to go overseas and get married. And then they can come back here. So on any given day, someone who we convert through ITIM Giur Kalacha, you used to have to go to Cyprus or Las Vegas or Prague, but now you can just do it online in Utah.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't help to go to Vegas because what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Right.
That's not true about Cyprus. What happens in Cyprus
is that right?
Can go anywhere. Yeah.
Oh, I gotta ask them.
That's their motto. What happens in Cyprus, everyone knows about.
I gotta ask them to delete the videotapes of that hotel I was at.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
you know about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the third battle, and the way we fight that battle is negotiating with the Chief Rabbinate, where today we're doing between 25 and 30% of all the conversions in Israel.
Wow.
Which is absurd. The Chief Rabbinate said, don't you think it's absurd that you can do these conversions? Don't you think it's absurd you're doing so many? And don't you think it's absurd that you can change the law, like the law of return? Like, that's crazy.
Right.
And I said, yes, I don't want to do this. And I say freely, I want to make sure that every person hears this.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this.
You want to make sure every person hears this is not the place.
I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it because it's very expensive and it shouldn't be private.
Yeah.
I want to change the way the system works. I want to write how conversion should work in this country. Right now, that's the most pressing problem because there's 581,000 people who are serving in the army and paying taxes and being denied basic rights in this country.
Just a second. So let's say someone now gets, let's say there's another Maxime who and Elena who get the same problem. Now they convert through ITIM Giur Kalacha, and they want to make sure the children are registered as Jewish.
So their children will be registered as Jewish, but their children will not be able to right now, and if people find out about it, get married in the rabbinate.
So that's still because the chief rabbinate.
Because the chief rabbi will say, even though you're registered as Jewish, go prove that you're Jewish.
And then they have to show your conversion,
and they don't accept it.
Okay, so where it stands now...
on what basis don't they accept it? What's the difference? Sorry, Benji.
That's fine.
What's the difference in substance between your process and their process? What's missing?
So there are some differentiating factors. The number one differentiating factor is when we convert... We won't convert someone who eats bacon. But we'll convert children of intermarried couples, even if the mom isn't converting right now. That's a huge differentiating factor. The rabbinate insists that children can only convert if the household turns completely Orthodox and the children goes to a religious school and the mother converts.
These are children of what age?
Under bar mitzvah. And we'll convert. That's about 60% of our conversions are kids under bar mitzvah.
So you have Max wants to convert.
But why is that the point where these are coming up with these issues?
Because the families don't want their kids to feel different. They don't want their kids to be invited to bar and bat mitzvahs and have their kid invite people to bar mitzvahs. And then in Beersheba, which has happened, the kids say, or either the school says, just be aware if you're going to his bar mitzvah, he's not Jewish, or that's happened. Or the kids say, you're not Jewish, so I'm not going to come to your bar mitzvah.
But 1 second. But so here's a situation where the parents want the kids for their friends to come to the bar mitzvah, but only one parent is willing to convert in order to make that happen?
No. One parent's already Jewish.
Ah, I see.
Right? You remember? Because one parent's already Jewish. If neither parent is Jewish, we don't convert the child at all. That's a
no, I was thinking that one of them wanted to convert, but the other one didn't. Okay. So the one's already Jewish, the one who isn't is converting.
The point is that the way we convert are people, this is a totally different thing that's happened in Jewish, it hasn't happened in Jewish history yet, maybe once. You have people with strong Jewish identities. They're living Jewish lives. Right? How many of these people, before they convert with us, Avi, how many of them are celebrating Purim? 100%.
Right.
Right? 100% of the kids are getting dressed up on Purim.
Not to offend any Russian listeners, that could be because it's the drinking holiday.
That's not
I'm just saying.
To say, but how is your process, though? Let's take the kids.
So the kids, it happens very quickly. It can happen within a few weeks.
And maybe that's why you're getting 60% are kids.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
So just to go back, I have a very basic question that I should know the answer to. But let's say when your Beit Din is converting them, you said that they have to go to Cyprus to get married, and
they do it on Utah online
or wherever. All these people do that. What's their status here once they do that? Are they married?
Yes,
they're married overseas, and just one of the spouses is not considered Jewish.
Correct.
Religiously, but they are civilly.
Right.
Okay. That's all very painful. Okay.
Okay, so I'll give you another painful example.
Yeah.
And then, because it's important for me to kind of illustrate things that don't go to litigation. It's a very sensitive example. So...
What happens
I
on
apologize.
this podcast stays on the podcast.
Right, no, so this is actually super sensitive. So starting in 2016, we started getting calls from one of the most sensitive places in the state of Israel, which is maternity wards. Mm-hmm. Why are moms calling us from maternity wards? They called when they went through a stillborn or a very late stage miscarriage. And why are they calling ITIM? They're calling ITIM because the social worker comes in and says, we're very sorry and we're here to help you. And the mom says, okay, like when's the burial? And they say, oh, no. The protocols in the state of Israel, you cannot participate in the burial and you can't even know where your child is buried. On late stage miscarriages or kids who died within 30 days. Now, where does that come from?
Yeah.
It comes from no one writing the story. That's what
no,
it is.
But is it?
When the story, so
there must be some
right.
Yeah.
So what happened? The founding of the state, they had to figure out who does national insurance pay for burials and who don't. So they turned to the Chevra Kadishas. The Chevra Kadisha said, we don't really have a rule for that. But we do know that you don't sit Shiva for kids under 30 days. Or it's a kid passed away before 30 days.
There's no Shiva.
There's no Shiva. From there, they extrapolated, which is also just a minhag. They extrapolated that we have to draw the line somewhere. And I understand they have to draw the line somewhere. The question is, where do you draw the line? So maybe 77 years ago, that was a reasonable place to draw the line. By the way, if you look at, I've done some like basic research into this because I know this like totally fascinates you, Benji. Mm-hmm. Like forget about Jewish. What was the norm about kids, young kids dying? And they're actually in the 1880s and 90s, etc. It was very normal to tell parents with very, very high infant mortality rates, just move on.
Yeah.
Right? And Judaism kind of like adopted that. So when 1948 happens, they have to make a decision quickly, even though it's only a handful of kids that are passing away at that age, right? They have to make a decision. They decide we're only going to give burial spots to 30 days, and the rest of the Chevra Kadisha will just handle however they want. Mm-hmm. Now, I can tell you what happened over the course of time. First, let me tell you the numbers. Nowadays, we're talking about 1,700 kids a year.
Today?
Today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in 2025, it'll be between 1,400 and 1,700. That's the average over the last 10 years. So I just assume it grows a little every year. Okay, because of medical advances and fertility and all sorts of things, right? Mm-hmm. Kids who die, right? Unfortunately, right? Yeah. It's tragic.
Yeah.
So it's an even bigger tragedy when you're not dealing, right? When the mom comes and they say, sorry, right? And the way it was working.
It's not a very old halacha. It's not a very old.
No, it's again, what does it mean, old halacha?
Like the Rambam doesn't talk about what you do.
But the Shulchan Aruch, right? But it doesn't say like parents can't participate.
What does it say?
It says you don't sit Shiva.
You don't sit Shiva. Uh-huh.
But the main point is that when you have a sovereign state and you have many people who aren't living under the rules of the Rambam and they're secular and they want to be part of their children's burial, and you have modern psychology and you have all sorts of things where there's a split, I don't know what the numbers are, but I imagine there's people who say it's very important for the parents to have that closure, and other parents, parents, they shouldn't be
It's certainly very personal.
Right. It's very, right. No one should impose that on the state. Kal v'chomer, ben menoshel kal v'chomer, it shouldn't be, right? It certainly shouldn't be that a guy, and again, I don't want to get graphic here, but we have pictures. We sent people into the field to video these guys. They were coming around once every 3 months, and the way they were burying kids was horrifying. It was literally horrifying in these mass graves that would make you sick. Really. And I've seen pictures of it, and we sent people to film the whole thing about how it was happening. There we didn't go to litigation. I had a meeting with the Minister of Justice, and I brought this issue to his attention. He said, it's not possible that we don't have a system for burying infants. And I said, no, that's what it is. And the government's not paying for it.
Which Minister of Justice?
Then it was Yaakov Naaman. That was where it started. It started with Naaman. He said, I don't believe you. I said, tell you what, take a week. And then have someone get back to me. 2 days later, someone calls me from the office. What do you propose we do? Now, generally, like I've been on a lot of roundtables. Like I was on the Prime Minister's roundtable of women's exclusion from public life. Remember when they wouldn't allow women on the buses and stuff? I represented people in burial that women could be able to speak at burials. In this case, I suggested let's make a committee of the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Religious Affairs and the Ministry of Justice, and let's bang out a new proposal. Let's just come out a new protocol. It shouldn't be 30 days afterwards. People should have, keyword for me, because I'm sure the last thing we're going to talk about tonight is what's my vision. People should have a choice about what they want to do. It's okay if the Chevra Kadishas think they shouldn't, but people should have a choice. Okay, it turns out that to have a choice, to get that into a protocol, takes like a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Sure.
Okay, to have all these meetings. What was ITIM's role at the thing? ITIM's role was we were, and we've done this many times. We represented the public. In 2016, we had 16 or 17 calls from families in this situation. People started hearing we can help, etc. All sorts of things happened. I found myself once personally in my car bringing a child to burial. I drove to Schneider. I brought the child to Jerusalem. We found the Chevra Kadisha that would bury him with the parents there, and I did it myself. Wow. Very, very painful. And we put together a new protocol. I remember sitting in a Knesset hearing in 2018 or 19 where I remember the head of the committee, who was Mickey Levy, I remember, he said, I want to start this committee.
Mickey Levy, the former.
No, not Mickey Levy.
Could be.
What's the other guy's name?
There was a speaker of the Knesset.
No,
was
wasn't
Mickey
it?
Levy.
Wasn't Mickey Levy.
He was like a policeman.
It's not important. Okay, forget this story. It's not important. Okay. The head of the committee wasn't Mickey Levy. I forgot who it was now. But he got up and he started the meeting and he said, I want you to know it happened to me and I've never told about it in public. Wow. We don't know where our child is buried.
Right. So there's no reason. So here you're talking about, I always thought, unfortunately, I know an incident in our family and where that happened. And I think similar thing where the burial was like that or was supposed to be. But I thought that was based on like some actual unchangeable halacha.
But the point is, this is not a thing. We're not living in a theocracy.
Really.
We're not living in a theocracy, and we shouldn't be living in a theocracy because there's families who want to live just normal lives. And the way they see normal lives, they should be able to participate in the burial of their children. Right. It's that simple. At this meeting, I remember the head of the forum of the Chevra Kadishas got up and they said, but isn't the minhag this? And he said, I guess the minhag has changed. I remember that line. It was very powerful for me.
So I think about that a lot.
The minhag changed.
I think about that a lot in other things, like in where who sets like moving to Israel and starting to go to shiva to pay shiva visits to to coworkers who weren't religious, which I never really went to non-religious shivas living in the U.S. And then and also going it's always sad, but going to people who were religious. But there were many more people who aren't religious. So, I don't know, what's it, 80 to 20, 80%, 20%, something like that, or 70%, 30%. But the overwhelming majority of everyone sits shiva, or almost everyone.
91%.
Yeah.
91% sit shiva. So 91% of 80% are these non-halachic shivas. And so when God says, how are the Jews sitting shiva? It's not the religious way. It's the Israeli way.
Right. So again, that's exactly the point where there's a new script being written, right? I'm just going to talk. So let me just finish this story, and then I just want to talk about two more things because I have a lot more stories to tell individual stories and crazy things because we have 100,000 stories. So,
well, you have a million stories. I could finish your story. Then I want to tell you something.
So this thing, not only did we get the protocol changed, so now it's 22 weeks after conception. Every child is entitled to a burial spot, and the parents can come, and the parents are allowed to. They have the choice in every social work. Then, over the last 5 years, we've gotten the government to allocate 3 million shekel a year to the Chevra Kadisha because the Chevra Kadisha refused to do it because they said we're not getting compensated for it. Whereas there was no clause in the Bituach Leumi law that enabled them to. Again, so we were able to change that. And now I have a guy who I think you should interview. He's 32 years old. He has 2 children of his own. And he spends winters for ITIM. He works for me full time, but he spends a day a week, every winter, where it's from, after the holidays until Pesach, basically. Once a week, he's in the field. He goes to hospitals and he trains social workers on this protocol. Wow. And he says, if you have a problem, you call me. And we get calls almost every day. We've helped more than 1,000 families retroactively find out where their children were buried.
He gives them a phone number. And then they call, and the governor of California answers. And he's like, what? I don't speak Hebrew. And he hangs up. But it still works.
Space-time continuum thing. So we've actually been able to change things systemically, not through litigation, but just through negotiation and just a lot of hard work and grit.
Right.
And I have a great team. I have 31 people working for me right now.
I remember a shocking story. I was at your house, I guess, and I met a couple with 2 young children who were staying there for some reason or visiting you. You might not remember any of this, but it was shocking to me. Basically, they had adopted a kid in the former Soviet Union, I don't know, somewhere in Eastern Europe. And the kid had been converted here, and you had helped with that, I guess. And the problem was that they then, I guess it was with the stipulation that the kid would go to have a religious education. And then I believe that they went and converted this kid's biological brother in this, back there in Eastern Europe, brought the kid over, and the rabbinate saw that the first kid had gone to a regular, like mamlechti school or day school or kindergarten or something, and then was not willing to convert the next kid.
And they went to a secular
Does that sound right, or I dreamt all that?
For sure that happened. I don't remember them being here, but it certainly could have happened. As you see, my memory is going. But yeah, there was those kinds of things happen, and then we try to fight for
crazy.
it. Look, there's on any given day you have crazy stories of in all sorts of things. They make the rabbinate system. You asked about differentiating facts when it comes to conversion. Imagine a situation where they insist that they won't give you a conversion certificate unless you change your last name.
Why?
Well, if your last name has anything to do with...
If your last name is Christ or...
What if it's Cohen?
I know Jews named Cohen.
Yeah. So if your last name is Cohen,
you're not a Cohen.
You're not a Cohen. I know I'm not a Cohen. I'm a convert.
The old bait and switch.
Yeah, but we're afraid people are going to mix you up. No one's going to mix me up with a Cohen. I'm a convert. But they insist. In other words, they insist they'll hold back. Which is, again, right now, I mentioned this guy about the 60%, right? So the 60%. Right now, the government doesn't have, I told you we're in litigation about this guy right now. Uh-huh. Right now, he's decided, for whatever reason, not to sign conversion certificates. Now, there's a biblical prohibition to persecute the convert, right? Mm-hmm. There's actually a few.
Yes, that's
right.
Wait, we're back to the guy in Ashdod or something?
No. Now I'm back to the guy who runs the conversion authority.
It's not fair to bring the actual intent of God into
No, he hasn't.
The guy who won't sign your conversions.
No, he won't sign his own conversion certificates right now because he's in a fight about whether he can keep his job or not.
Okay. Oh, so, that guy with the 60%.
With the 60%. Yeah. So he's not signing conversion certificates. So right now, for 2 months already, there's no conversion certificates being signed. So
my God. Can I just tell you something, Rabbi? We wanted to interview you to take a break from the depression of the war and the security situation.
This has definitely done that.
They're a real problem.
Well, do you ever worry that in shining a light on all this and having the successes that you do, aren't you... I guess a byproduct of that is you're basically airing our dirty laundry everywhere, like how screwed up this place is in terms of the religious establishment.
So most of what we do, we don't air publicly. There's for every
That's why I came on this podcast.
No, this is like the minor stuff. Yeah. You should see some of the major stuff that's going on.
Give me a major one.
What areas?
No. Today we sent a letter about corruption in the religious the Ministry of Religious Affairs. In other words, the minister is a guy named Malkieli. Uh-huh. He has the mankal of the system is a guy named Yehuda Avidan from the Shas party, and we have him on tape saying to someone like, "You'll never get this job because you don't." Basically, something along the lines. I'm oversimplifying.
I don't know if you're allowed to talk about the case.
Because I'm not talking about the case. Okay. Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. But basically, he says things that, I won't go into the details. But
you screwed up the whole podcast.
I just want to be careful.
That are very incriminating in terms of corruption.
Okay. We had our first
overwhelming.
Well, what do you expect if it's in the Ministry of Religious Affairs? I mean, you're not allowed to have affairs.
This is, someone once said in our shul, I don't know if you were there once, but we once had a panel discussion about which of the Aseret HaDibra, which of the 10 Commandments is the most significant today in the state of Israel. And Baruch Ikra, who's a member of our shul, got up and he said, the one that's most significant is Lo Tisah Shem Hashem Elokecha Lashav.
That's one I would have said.
Right, don't take God's name in vain. He said, it's not the standard thing, like what the Gemara talks about, that you use God's name. He said, it's just that you use God's name to promote, to promote your own interests.
Right.
Like you're speaking as if you're in the name of God. And that, I guess that brings me to kind of like, again, I could tell you, hundreds of other stories really about, and again, I'm not, just sad things. But what I want to say is two things. One is that there is a price to be paid, which is airing the dirty laundry, but there's a bigger price to be paid, which is not airing it. Mm-hmm. Which if we don't try to solve these problems and try to solve them systemically, then we're just, continuing to keep our heads in the sand and we're not, there's no chance we'll get out of this. So once upon a time, when I started this, 20 plus years ago, I really thought we could solve all the problems. Mm. Now I understand we can solve some of them. We can do it incrementally.
But you started the podcast meaning, what did you say? You said that basically everything is as bad as when you started. I don't remember how you put that.
No, statistically speaking, but we've made incremental changes. We haven't made the big changes that have made people say Judaism is something that we can rally around as opposed to Judaism something that's divisive. That's one thing I thought we could solve. Yeah. We're not there. We're not there yet. It could be after October 7th. Maybe I'll just spend a minute talking about some of the things we did after October 7th, because I think that always interests people. Like what happens on October 8th for an organization like mine? An organization like mine, ITIM, is leveraged really, really well to help thousands of people. We know the burial system in Israel better than anybody. Right? We know the mikvah system in Israel better than anybody. So I'll start with the mikvah thing. There's an interesting thing, right? 2 weeks into the war, it actually was 3 days into the war when I started writing the letters, but 2 weeks into the war, you have 300,000 men that are called up, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows that, whatever, we can talk about a lot of religious Zionists, not, but in this country, just statistically speaking, there's 600,000 women a year, 600,000 individual users of mikvahs in this country. Mikvahs are sponsored by...
Mikvahs for our people who don't know might be listening.
We lost them already.
Our ritual baths
that a woman would use after menstruation, a week after menstruation, or 10 days or 12 days after menstruation.
So explicit, but
okay.
What are we gonna say?
So 600,000 women visit the mikvahs every year. Okay, mikvah use is done unclothed. It's done at night. Okay, the unclothed business. I'll just take a step back for a moment. It's done with an attendant in the room. That's something we sue the state of Israel for. So many women, again,
a female
attendant.
Right,
yes,
right.
a female attendant. We sued the state of Israel. We said some women just don't want that attendant in the room. It's not comfortable for them to submit themselves or subject themselves to a physical exam, to a viewing, whatever. And we won. And in every mikvah in this country right now, we've changed the way mikvahs work in this country. Every mikvah is a sign. The mikvah attendant is here for use. You don't want it? No problem. You can do it yourselves. We just opened up a new website called My Mikvah. Right here. This is the only promotion I'm doing tonight. Right? Maybe I should say you can send your checks too. But My Mikvah is the first website in Israel that talks about, that actually has a system, not only where you can grade the mikvahs, but it's the first place that talks about where you can use the mikvah without the attendant. It tells you in every single mikvah which one you can do without the attendant if you don't want to. It also tells you the quality of the water. It's something we did in Corona. People were afraid to use the mikvahs in Corona. It turns out all those measurements exist. Just no one knew how to access them. We've turned them into a user-friendly site where you can know when the last...
you can see how gross the water is.
When the last testing of the water is. Many women's mikvahs, they're supposed to change the water every eight dunks. So you should know. Okay, I'm a repository of silly...
8 dunks? They change all the water?
They don't, but they should.
We'd have no water in the country.
Okay.
I mean, that's a lot.
Yes.
I'm not for that.
Fine.
Okay, what happened after the war?
So
you've gone too far.
Okay, way off topic.
The Kinneret is empty, by the way. We spoke about that on our last episode.
Right.
So we wrote to the chief rabbis and said, you have sirens going off every night. You have women with kids at home. The women are afraid to go to the mikvahs. Open the mikvahs during the day. Now that doesn't happen every day.
Well, that's also, but that's is that allowed?
Excellent question.
I mean,
are there halachic precedents? So I wrote like a 3-page halachic brief saying why this is a time where it should be done. This is an emergency because you have all these women who want to go to the mikvah who can't, because they can't go out at night, they can't this, they can't that, back and forth. And we were successful. We got the mikvahs open during the day without going into all the details. And I have actually a letter from the chief rabbi thanking me for not just bringing it to attention, but being responsible for getting these open. On the other hand, I wrote a letter to the chief rabbis on the second day as well. And I said, remember we talked about 6% of the Jewish population is not halachically Jewish?
Yeah.
So I wrote a letter on the second day of the war. A letter, and again, it comes from my office. I signed it, but it's from my office. That says it's impossible that there aren't people who were killed in the Nova who aren't halachically Jewish. It's simply not possible from a statistical point of view.
Okay.
And 10 years ago, open parentheses, 10 years ago, I was involved in a whole movement to try to get soldiers who were killed in the line of duty, depending on, even if they weren't halachically Jewish, to be buried inside the military cemetery as Jews, even with, they made minor modifications that no one could pay attention to allow that to happen. And I wrote a letter to the chief rabbi and I said, hey, we need to do the same MO, the same modus operandi for people who were killed in the Nova.
Okay.
If we find bodies and they weren't halachically Jewish and we can identify them, they need to be buried, if the family wants, in the Jewish cemetery. It would be a huge chilul Hashem if we didn't do that.
Not just at the Nova, I would say any victim of terror.
Right. Correct. It hadn't come up because the biggest victim, without going into the details, but usually you don't have masses, and it doesn't, right? Yeah. Here you finally had a mass where it was obviously going to happen. Back and forth letters. They said, we know how to handle it, etc. And they didn't. They handled it very, very poorly. And 2 people were buried outside the cemetery. Now we're involved in legislation. There's legislation on the table of the Knesset to make this a law. The people killed as terror victims, all terror victims. If they're killed like this, they'll be buried if they want. They don't have to be. Imagine, I'll just skip to later on. Imagine a situation, okay, we had 40,000 people from the north who were uprooted, right? They're living in the center of the country. Not people who were killed in, I want to say, maybe January, February 24, both from Rishon LeZion. Our grandfather died. He's from Kiryat Shmona. We can't bury in Kiryat Shmona, even though there were burials in Kiryat Shmona. We're not willing to do that. So we went to Rishon, where they put us up, and they said, for 40,000 shekel, you can bury him here.
Oh, God.
And we had no choice.
Because you only get free burial where you live. Right.
This is not a Jewish, not Jewish thing. This is a burial.
Right, this is a burial thing. So how do you change that? How do you change it? The Chevra Kadisha says it's our right to charge you 40,000 shekel. So how do you change that?
That's just a Chevra. That's not a Chevra Kadisha.
So again, a lot of these things operate in all sorts of ways. So that's something we changed.
Right.
We simply changed by airing dirty laundry. Okay, by telling the story and mobilizing members of Knesset to say this just can't be. We cannot do this in light of these people are uprooted. And we got just like any soldier who's killed is allowed to be buried anywhere in any military cemetery. That's just a law, you should know.
Yeah.
Hopefully you never need it. So the same thing, we said there was a law, there wasn't a law, it was a protocol that was instituted that said anybody who has the classification of uprooted can be buried wherever they want for free. Right. That was something we changed.
Or you could just have credits, like they could get a free burial in Kiryat Shmona in exchange. The private markets.
What are you talking about? And then you can get married in Ashkelon after.
You bury him here for free. We'll let you bury someone
So I want to... So those are some of the things we did during the war.
I've never had so many questions in my mind at once. Like my head's going to explode. Let me ask you...
It's only like 2 questions, but he's never had that many.
And I forgot one.
Take a deep breath. How are you?
No. How do your enemies, can I call them? Or how does the establishment see you? Like, do they see you just as some like quasi-Orthodox rabbi who's a provocateur, who's just making their lives difficult? Do they see you? I guess there's no they, but the establishment, like they look at you a certain way, like you're always doing the same thing and they're always on the other side of it. So what are the reactions you get?
So the answer is yes and yes and yes. I'm not always doing the same thing. It's not I'm telling some of the stories that are more provocateur, but there's a lot of times I work with them, right? We just, on Shabbat, I don't know if you were in shul, but we had a 21-year-old boy who I literally met on the street when he was a soldier in Gaza. And it turns out he grew up here in Ra'anana and he was converting in the army conversion program. And it's not like I took him to my conversion program to convert him. We helped him in a very significant way finish up his conversion. And on Shabbat, he came to our shul and had an aliyah for the first time. He just finished his immersion on Thursday. So I work with them as much as I work to change them. Uh-huh. You asked me what the relationship is. Some people hate me and think I'm the biggest thorn in their side. Mm-hmm. Some people have learned to respect me. Some people don't know what to make of me and any team in general. Yeah. Like I said, I think the new chief rabbis have kind of made a tactical decision, if not a strategic one, to keep me closer than the previous chief rabbis. So I have regular meetings with them. They're happy to mention my name to other people. Uh-huh. Like there's much more of a, I wouldn't call it camaraderie. We're not friends, right? But we don't like share emojis on our on our WhatsApps. But there is
other than phylacteries.
Okay, so that's interesting. They see you in all kinds of ways. Yes. I want to take a step back in terms of the rabbinate itself, right? So, like expectations of any established rabbinate, like probably shouldn't be so high. I would think historically they've always been hated. Probably, right?
It begins with Jesus, or maybe Korach.
There have been different times when we've had a rabbinate in Russia. There have been times when there's like the government appointed a rabbinate, and I imagine it becomes part of the establishment, right? But here, maybe we have higher expectations because it's the Jewish state, right? But I want you to diagnose the elements that, because the system you're describing is impossible to comprehend, and you may be the only person in the world who gets it. So, but like, what are the roots of the problem as to why they can't be more flexible or won't be? I imagine one of it is like either they are Haredi or playing to Haredim and they don't want to show any flexibility. Another is like just like rampant, what do you call it? Shochad? Like
corruption.
Rampant corruption in the way, because it's, I don't know if it's lifetime appointments, whatever it might be. But like, so talk about why it's this way, and then talk about big ticket solutions that you would like to see that could happen.
Okay. So in terms of identifying the source of the problem, I think the problem is that this is a self-perpetuating machine. It's a snowball to a certain extent. It's become a job machine for thousands and thousands of people. Mm-hmm. And that creates an incentive not to change anything.
And it's not based on merit, the
no, for sure not.
Okay.
For sure it's not a meritocracy. It's all political, from the chief rabbis and all the way down, right? In other words, the chief rabbis council, let's say that's the council of 17 that helps set the halachic policies of this country for the chief rabbi. In the previous constellation of the chief rabbinate, we haven't elected a new one yet. 10 of them came from 3 families.
Oh, God.
So that was a majority from 3 families, right? The Lau family, the Yosef family, one other family. So in other words, it's somewhat of an absurdity, but it's self-perpetuating.
Okay.
If the 150-member council that chooses the chief rabbis, and most of the people on the committee were appointed by the chief rabbis to their positions, so obviously it's a given. What's going to happen? In other words, they're going to be able to choose. So let's say out of the last 5 chief rabbis, and the Sephardi community, 3 of them have been from the Yosef family.
Okay, but that sort of situation would necessarily impact, let's say, never overhauling the way people are appointed, because they don't want that.
Correct.
But it doesn't mean that we can't have normal conversion, or that there's nobody with a big picture approach to anything.
So it does, because they don't have a big picture, or they don't have a sense of what the stakes are here. Whereas there's no reason for them to have a sense of what the stakes are here, because they're only responding to the people. They don't have. There's no accountability. Uh-huh. So that's what creates. So I want to create a system. I'll talk about my vision.
But just there are probably also people who are totally ethical, very committed to doing the right thing, who believe that the traditions and the laws of halakha as they believe them are more important to keep than to take into consideration the changes people want to make, or ultimately that's the best way. That's what God wants. That's what, and so good people could perpetuate the rules that create problems, but these people will think that the problems, God wants the problems, or God will solve the problem.
So it's an excellent question. There's an argument to be made that says, well, we're back in Israel. Let's have one method of being Jewish. You can make that argument, right? I think that dismisses everything that's happened. I think Judaism was based on multiple traditions. And certainly when people are coming together for the first few hundred years, we have to respect those multiple traditions and find different ways to do them. Mm-hmm. And we have to give a place in a Jewish democratic state for people who don't, to opt out if that's not where they want to be. Mm-hmm. Like there shouldn't be religious coercion. So in my vision of things, I think there have to be what I call passages, or maslulim in Hebrew, pathways, where people can choose different pathways of experiencing these areas of Jewish life where there is an encounter with the state. Before I articulate exactly what this looks like, I want to just differentiate it from what the standard approach is. Most people in my position who have seen the dark underbelly of what I've seen would say we need to separate church and state completely.
I just want to give you just a little tip, if I can. Mm-hmm. I think if you wanted to catch more, it should be separation of synagogue and state. Okay. I'm just saying.
That's a good point.
Okay.
Okay, so most people would say, the government shouldn't be involved in this at all. I disagree with that. I think there's something wonderful about the fact, we haven't talked about some of the other areas in which they touch, building eruvin or mikvahs and we can talk about Shabbat at some future date, because we're not going to talk about it tonight.
Let's talk about it on
Shabbat. It's going to be Shabbat.
Okay, right.
But I think that it's wonderful that the state is involved and supports the Jewish lives of its citizens. But I think people have to have choices, whether to opt in or out. And when they have choices, it shouldn't undermine the integrity of those who want to live a halachic lifestyle. So if you don't want to get married through, let's say, the halachic way, then you should have a way to do it that won't impinge upon the halachic way. One of the great arguments, like we need to have the rabbinical courts do divorce is so that we don't have mamzerut, without going into the whole argument.
Right.
But there are ways of people not being married or not being married halachically, they could still be married civilly, that would enable them to at once be married, but even if they decided to get divorced and didn't decide to get a get, they wouldn't bring mamzerim into the world.
Okay.
But you have to have a mind to nuance. You have to, just like when it comes to conversion, the way we convert, I'm very honest, it's not, or let's say, forget about the way we convert. Because we convert, kind of according to the book. Let's say Rabbi Melamed from
but that's a question. Your conversion of adults, right, or children.
Our conversion of children.
How different is it than a regular rabbinic conversion?
So the conversion of children is fundamentally different.
Well, you explained why, meaning because the mother doesn't have to convert.
Because the mother doesn't have to convert.
But I'm saying let's say the process for a regular old adult who's like, I want to be Jewish.
Right. So
let's take more lenient?
I'll just take someone. It really depends on the rabbinical court. But let's take someone like Rabbi Melamed, who converts for us. Rabbi Melamed is certainly someone who is strongly entrenched in the halachic community and strongly entrenched in, let's say, the right-wing Zionist community. The guy lives in Har Bracha and almost never leaves, right? And he consistently tells me that anytime he has the opportunity, he says, your Beit Din is way too stringent in its requirements for adults. Because you shouldn't make people study in Israel for more than 2 weeks. Now, how much can you learn in 2 weeks?
Don't tell my son that.
Right.
It's finals now.
Okay. In other words, he says, we need to convert people now and hope that he says, that's the halachic tradition. So his reading of the halachic sources is that was the majority. But other people say that wasn't the way it was done. But again, he's right and they're right. There was this whole debate. So I don't think we need to, at this point in Jewish history, just decide there's only one way to do things. We can celebrate the multiplicity of approaches within the halachic community and also offers options, and I'm not embarrassed to say this, that are non-halachic. As long as they don't impinge on the halachic community, we can offer people the opportunity to get married civilly, where it won't be a halachic wedding, and therefore they don't require a halachic divorce. Right. Again, I'm not saying there aren't rabbinical authorities who think that they do require a halachic divorce, but I think the standard is that you don't require a halachic divorce. And then you'll be able to, allow people to have freedom of choice. And then, to some extent, let the best man or woman win.
But could those children be buried in a Jewish cemetery?
Yes. They totally can be buried in a Jewish cemetery. They're not mamzerim, and it's totally fine. It's all fine.
Right.
The problem is you have to be willing to look a little bit beyond where you stand.
But practically, there's a lot of elements to that.
We have a program, and it can happen because the Knesset passes laws, and it happens because rabbis recognize that the alternatives aren't so great. It took a long time for the conversion issue to become a place that's in the consensus of a lot of the religious Zionist community. The way the rabbinate is doing it is just wrong for our time.
I just want to say, in case we have any Russian listeners, but even if we don't, I've always been impressed by the attitude of Russian immigrants, former Soviet Union immigrants to Israel, that with all of this discrimination, right, with burial, with conversion, with all the hardships they have to go through with this halachic, bureaucratic discrimination, that they, by and large, first of all, what you see in the war now, their participation in the Israel Zionist project is, as equal to or beyond any other communities, and their participation in Israeli society. In a way, it doesn't get them down.
It does get them.
You see them down, right. but as a community, they're very much here. They're very much integrated.
Down. Avi, they get down when they meet someone in the army, and then they find out they can't get married to them.
Of course,
and they're devastated.
But even with that terrible discrimination, which is terrible and hurtful, as a community, they're kind of still optimistic. I say that it's a little bright spot in the...
Yeah, no, there are definitely a lot of bright spots here, and maybe I'm not emphasizing...
I think the whole thing is a bright spot. The fact that these fights, in quotation... Well, not in quotation marks, that these fights... when you said you're opening up another department beyond litigation, I thought it was going to be like violence or at least sarcasm or something. But in the end, it's a halachic conversion. But that this is going on is a very optimistic part of... it's messy, it's mean, it's gritty... And it's a fight, but it's the fact that it's happening is a good thing. It's a little bit healthy.
The fact that what's happening?
That there is a battle being waged over these issues. That it's not totally ossified.
The fact that ITIM exists, that Rabbi Farber exists, is a bright spot.
But also he has all kinds of partners.
Chicago,
from
Illinois,
Har Bracha,
60609.
from Yeshivat Har Etzion, from
It's all amazing, but I have real concerns. Meaning, look, if I were you, I would be both like encouraged and depressed full time, because you're like on the margins. You're bringing joy to people who were really in terrible situations, like on an individual basis, right? And you're having these small wins, right? But this vision of pathways, let's say, it doesn't actually have a chance.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you what the answer to that question is.
Yeah.
And then I think I'm going to have to finish up. You're supposed to tell me we're supposed to finish up. And I'm telling you, I have
Oh,
to
yeah, we
finish up.
forgot that. Who's in charge here?
Traditionally, you're in charge of the time. Man.
Oh, right. I
Well,
don't
you're
look at the
way
clock.
off.
Yeah.
Turns out Benji cares about Judaism. Who knew?
Yeah.
We're 77 years young. We're just the beginning of this project. That's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
This is the dawn of something that we don't even know how. Not only do we not know how it turns out, we haven't even started.
Mm-hmm.
It just totally brings me back to where I started tonight, Benji. I thought I missed it, and it turns out it hasn't even happened yet.
Mm.
Or yes, there have been these peaks and these great moments, but determining what Judaism is going to look like, this fabulous tradition that we're part of, determine what it's going to look like for the next 2,000 years, we don't even know. So, and there's no reason to have expected that after 77 years we'd get it right.
Right.
So that's the real story. So, like I said, I've had to make shifts in my mind. I'm not going to solve all the problems. I'm not. I have spent since October 7th, our main strategic piece is coming up with a grand plan. And I've met with all the party leaders except for Bibi and the Haredim to talk about this plan and to start seeding it. And I've met with religious Zionist leaders, and I've met with all sorts of secular. I've met with a crazy amount of people about this. There might be an opportunity now because people are interested in rewriting the story of the state of Israel. And there might not. I don't know.
Right.
But I know I'm not going to finish it because it's a 30-year plan or a 40-year plan, or it's an X number. It's unknown.
Right.
And obviously demographics are not necessarily working towards this.
Well, I was going to say that, meaning the approach of pathways, or what do you say in Hebrew?
Passages, maslulim.
Maslulim.
But also, nativ also means pathway.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my shul is also called Netivot.
Netivot.
It should sound familiar.
Pathways,
This seems to be a theme in my life.
Yes. Yeah. But Haredim, like that idea is antithetical to their basic belief. Also, them signing off or giving their imprimatur to some innovation is just not really generally like their approach.
Imprimatur.
And so,
I just looked it up.
and so they have the numbers in terms of religious Jews. They have the power politically going forward, also seemingly. So, where is the hope there?
That's why I feel a sense of urgency. But I understand. I feel a sense of urgency while we still can make these differences. I'll just give you one example, okay? And this can be documented very, very easily. If you go back to the Knesset protocols of the fight with Maxim and Alina.
People are going to think that the protocols are true because we keep on talking about protocols. But anyway, go on.
I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
So you'll see Haredi members of Knesset talking about how pathetic the conversions in the army are.
Mm.
And one guy even went on the record saying, all the women who converted there are shiksas.
Right, I remember
Maybe you remember that.
Yeah.
Once we started ITIM Gior Kalacha, and there was a hearing in the Knesset about it, then all of a sudden the army conversions became sanctified. They're kadosh.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys are the failures and the shiksas and whatever. So the landscape moved. In other words, what exactly, the goalpost moved? What happened exactly? In other words, 5 years ago or 7 years ago, the army conversions were pasul machmat miyus, right? They were forbidden. They were ridiculous, and now they become the holy ones. And in other words, someone else moved in on the thing. So the point is, you have to just keep moving the goalposts. And as you move the goalposts, in other words, they become their norms or sociological, nothing less and nothing more.
Right. And so you see an opportunity now, meaning before like demographics shift everything.
Certainly before demographics, also because of October 7th and a newfound sense of the Jewish story being an important story here in Israel for all sorts of reasons. And and I'm not sure that the Haredim, there's something going on in that community. I don't know exactly what to say. I'm no predictor of what it's going to look like. I've heard
it's
for
not
30
sustainable.
years.
We've heard that for 30 years.
It's not sustainable.
Right.
So, but
it's not.
I'd like to be right, but it's not. But I'd like to believe that somehow we're going to be successful, and more importantly, is not to get frustrated. Yes, you're right. I spend a lot of my time feeling very frustrated and very enamored by this whole thing at the same time. Yeah. Right now, I'm feeling particularly tired. But
take the hint, Benji.
It's over. But the thing I want to say is that it's not just that we shouldn't give up hope. We actually can't give up hope because the stakes are too high.
Right.
That's the truth.
All right,
Rabbi, thank you.
Thank you very much for everything you do.
Yeah.
And thanks for hosting us here. We're actually recording this at your home office, and we appreciate the
thank you. This is my wife's
hospitality
office.
And your wife's office.
We didn't even mention your wife.
We didn't mention we're all from Riverdale. Also.
Who's your wife?
Yes.
Just give her a shout out. A plug for a podcast, at least.
I'm trying to make sure you guys interview her at some point. So.
We will. Yeah.
Good idea.
Okay, so she'll tell her own story. She does not need
you
to be.
You married well. That's all.
She does not. I married. How do you say it? I married. She was a step above me. What's the phrase?
I don't know because it didn't happen to me. I'm kidding.
But she's not a descendant of the Chasam Sofer, as you keep telling me. Rabbi, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
It was really wonderful.
All right. Mr. Koch, and good luck.